Chapter 682. Oh my, an unexpected harvest. Luonan never expected that the effects of mounting the Luonan ruler would manifest so quickly. The barrier in Yin Li's heart had practically collapsed like a broken dam. Perhaps she still had a chance to repair herself, but the Wraith sign had noiselessly shaken off 2 strands of spider silk in the polar domain, which was even deeper than the abyssal region. This was to make up for the work of constructing the network nodes. One strand directly adhered to the structure of Yin Li's body and soul. Yin Lu, whose mind was in turmoil, was completely unaware of it. And the instant the connection was made, a portion of essence energy spilled out due to the turmoil in her mind. It flowed out along the spider silk and seamlessly connected to the altar's spiderweb, linking up with each other. From Luonan's perspective, Yin Lu had become a normal operating node on the altar's spiderweb. Though Luonan couldn't say that he understood everything about her, he was able to see the majority of the changes in trends from the corresponding feedback. Of course, he could do more direct interference. On the other hand, though Mrs. Halder's spider silk was able to adhere with force, the altar's spiderweb was unable to reach the core when it attempted to establish a connection with her. It was unable to extract life essence energy. The operating mechanism of the winner takes all and the loser perishes appeared to be blocked here. If the nodes of the altar's spiderweb were like Mrs. Halder's, then this network could simply be shut down. This woman is truly amazing. Luonan harbored such thoughts, not caring about the temporary setback. Instead, he was more curious about the analysis diagram that he had seized on the spur of the moment. What sort of image did he have in the eyes of the amazing Mrs. Halder? Since the diagram was logical and clear, Luonan scanned it once and had a certain understanding of the results of the analysis. The feeling was quite complicated. It was a bit shameful, but it was quite interesting. Some of the conclusions made him ponder, but some were quite repulsive. When put together, it seemed a bit scary. But when he mulled it over, he was inexplicably pleased with himself. Overall, he felt that it was quite reasonable. So I'm actually this sort of person. Is it good or bad? It should be okay. Boss. Yin Lu spoke with a hoarse voice 80 kilometers away. Her breath was dry and weak. It was hard for her to continue. Her mind was still a bit muddled right now. She didn't dare to think about what sort of terrible consequences her terrible reaction would bring. Don't think too much about it, Madame Halder said calmly. Some things are all about coincidence. It was easy for us to obtain this piece of information, so it's not a big deal to give it up. Mr. Luo isn't someone who fusses over every ounce. These words were addressed to both sides at the same time. Luonan had already said his goodbyes before, but if he really wanted to make a comeback, there were no access fences in this region of Xia City that could stop him. Actually, Luonan was still paying attention. Mrs. Halder faintly smiled. It looked like she didn't mind Yin Li's major mistake at all. She didn't care about Luonan's possible negative feedback either. She even had the leisure to continue making a small analysis. Mr. Luo's age is at the tail end of puberty. His personality is still unsettled. It's not bad to have a clear understanding of himself. Moreover, judging from the intelligence, Mr. Luo's hormone secretion was in disorder during the most critical years of his second puberty. Mr. Luo had been constantly taking medicine to modify his nervous system, and his development was also lagging. His body affected his mind, so it was only natural that his personality would change greatly. What's the point of torturing yourself for a change that's destined to happen? Clearly, Mrs. Halder had noticed Yin Li's terrible state. She began to relieve her stress and teased Luonan in passing. This probably meant that a certain someone was still a child who had yet to finish puberty. Luonan didn't know what sort of attitude he should take to deal with this. Oh, right now he was the one who said his goodbyes. He should pretend not to hear it. He completed his mental construction with great difficulty when laughter suddenly came from beside him. Mr. Luo, your previous words might have been a bit offensive, but they are all variables after all. You absolutely cannot be careless, nor can you have any rebellious thoughts. Forcefully changing your personality isn't necessarily a good thing. Luonan turned his head speechlessly and saw Fei Jin to the side. A subtle and indescribable smile was displayed on her youthful and beautiful face. She formed a similar yet contradictory picture with Mrs. Halder, who was 80 kilometers away. Was this a counterattack? Luonan really didn't expect that Mrs. Halder would use Fei Jin, an old channel. Just as he was frowning, Fei Jin's dazed and bewildered eyes regained some light. She lightly swept her gaze over and stopped at the glowing virtual work area in front of Luo Nan. This was Luo Nan's sketch work. Though it was just a silhouette and the facial features were still messy, the bearing of a mature woman on the rocking chair had already appeared. It formed a clear correspondence with the scene 80 kilometers away. The two women were of different ages and appearances, but their words and charms were synchronized at this moment. "Mr. Luo, you're quite interested in me?" "You can say that." Luo Nan was embarrassed at first, but then he thought about it. "You guys took me apart into 3 pieces and tossed them around on a diagram. Can't I just make a portrait of you?" The thought sprouted in his mind and he added a few words at the back. He even said in a genteel manner, "There are many aspects of Mrs. Halder that can be drawn." Ainli's eyes went wide. She subconsciously held her breath. Mrs. Halder was still as calm as before. According to the intelligence, when Mr. Luo first entered the profession, he was a psychic who entered the path of painting. He was extremely efficacious. "I wonder if there is anything particular about this painting?" "Oh, there is." Luo Nan turned to look at this unfinished painting. He wanted to use this opportunity to retort. He couldn't lose his momentum. But the words in his mind were like a sketch that couldn't be continued. They were stuck in the middle, unable to evolve any further. The sketch was still the same sketch, but his train of thought and structure had been replaced by the constantly changing impressions. It was completely unrecognizable. Of course, it was very easy for Luo Nan to make a simple sketch right now. He was able to sketch out Mrs. Halder's charm with just a few strokes. But the problem was that Luo Nan's goal had never been a simple sketch. Instead, he started from the core of his mental senses, reproducing and refining from multiple angles and all aspects. This draft was far too lacking when compared to his own requirements. The foundation of Mrs. Halder was far more complex and profound than what he knew when he first began to draw. At this very moment, Luo Nan suddenly felt like he was a stupid student who was nearing the end of an exam but had yet to finish answering the questions. An incorporeal pressure quietly grew, and by the time he realized it, it had already formed quite a large scale. He was truly amazing. This wasn't the first time Luo Nan let out this sort of sigh. However, the holes in his imagination were quite a bit larger than last time. Perhaps this was Mrs. Halder's ruler that probed into his heart. Mrs. Halder gave Luo Nan a reminder. When he used Luo Nan's ruler to probe into the depths of others' hearts, others would have a reaction force. Some of them were insignificant and unrecognizable, like He Dong Lu, Yu Qi, and even Yin Lu. Some of them were much more powerful, much more swift and fierce, like Mrs. Halder. All sorts of forces converged together and squeezed together. It was only natural that there would be pressure. Madame Halder was but the most obvious of these. Other reactions, neat and fragmentary, were still steadily gathering. Actually, Luo Nan already had a similar experience. Back when the altar spiderweb had just been set up, the vital energy circulating within was taxed. Even though each bit was just a fraction, many a little makes an ocean, there was still an enormous amount of profit. Of course, this profit was a kind of positive feedback, but the enormous accumulation itself was pressure. Fortunately, Luo Nan had the Wraith Sign, the Blood Soul Temple, the Soul Cloak, and a series of other distribution channels. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been squeezed to the point of bursting. He just needed a bit of residual energy to continue to support the God Gear Icy Ocean. This would give his body gear enough driving force to maintain rapid progress. Positive feedback was already like this. Negative feedback. Well, from a higher level, there was no such thing as positive or negative feedback. It was just how to deal with it. Take a look at Mrs. Halder. She had digested and reused Luo Nan's overbearing pressure. She was like an enormous furnace, smelting out the most suitable materials for herself. Speaking of which, the methods of both sides were pretty much the same. It was just that Luo Nan needed to carefully ponder and learn Mrs. Halder's method of transforming the negative interference force. However, the most important thing right now was that Luo Nan finally grasped a thread of inspiration after some contemplation. Perhaps his awkward silence lasted a bit too long, but it didn't matter. The tip of his pen gently moved, and his thoughts that had been blocked for a while were cleared up. He finally began to ink in the virtual work area that had been vacant for a long time. Luo Nan didn't do anything else. He just focused on strengthening the contrast between the light and the dark side, causing Mrs. Halder, who was sitting calmly in the work, to have more tension in the dark side. It was so much so that it appeared slightly distorted. It was like a furnace emitting high temperatures to the outside world. Her pupils, half hidden in the dark side, were like fiery red doors. It was as if high-temperature flames could sputter out from them at any time. Wow! Fei Jin let out a soft sigh from the side. Of course, this was synchronized with her controller. But there was actually nothing else after this. The corner of Luo Nan's lips perked up. Some things really were comprehensible by drawing analogies. When his sketchwork was completed, his blurry and ever-changing impressions suddenly became clear and definite. Especially the spiderweb that had been tossing and turning around Mrs. Halder all this time. The tactile feedback of the spiderweb also became real. It was as if he had touched a blazing furnace sealed in flesh and blood. He could feel the scorching and surging energy within, but the energy was highly orderly. Practically every bit of it had a clear direction of flow. He understood a little bit. A knock came from the room at this time. Not even 2 seconds later, someone knocked on the glass door to the balcony. "Mr. Luo, is it convenient?" Yuan was on the other side of the glass door. "Oh, Sister Yuan. Please come in." Luo Nan quickly responded. At this time Fei Jin reached out a hand to touch her chest. She bowed toward him. "This item has been returned to its rightful owner. What she needs right now is a good night's sleep. I'll be borrowing the bedroom for a bit. You can do whatever you want with it." Chapter 683. Fei Jin was like a virtuous lady returning home. She maintained her graceful posture as she walked out from the balcony. She turned to the bedroom next to her. She even remembered to say, "Good night, everyone." Only then did she gently close the door and settle down. Actually, everyone knew that with Luo Nan, a master of perception, there was no point in closing the door. It was just a gesture. Soon, the breathing in the bedroom turned from shallow to chaotic. It was as if they had sunk into a nightmare. This was more or less the same result for the real Fei Jin. It would be better to ask Mr. Bai to come and take a look tomorrow. He's an expert in mental invasion and hypnosis. Yuan gave a suggestion. Luo Nan was fine with getting rid of future troubles. Yuan's goal in coming over wasn't just this. Luo Nan was very clear on this. He also thought of a good way to explain. Sister Yuan, Mrs. Halder has arrived in Xia City." Just as he started, loud whistles and jeers surged in from outside the balcony. A few extremely bored second-generation kids were looking forward to Luo Nan and Fei Jin doing something on the balcony. Although Fei Jin had entered the room by herself, the seamless connection was made in the blink of an eye. A great beauty with even greater bearing and elegance came up. There seemed to be more room for imagination, so their moods were stirred up quite a bit. This period of time was enough for quite a few people to stuff some alcohol and food down their throats. The effects of alcohol and drugs surged up, and the words that came out of their mouths became even more boundless. There was no need to talk about the off-key words. He Donglu, who had been the vanguard of stirring up trouble, simply gave up on the long-legged beauty he had just hooked up with when he saw the great stylish OL lady from everyone's mouths. He pulled up his collar and ran away. Under the simultaneous effects of Luo Nan's ruler and the reading ruler, perhaps he was the most pitiful person. Serves him right. Luo Nan ignored He Donglu. His gaze swept across the bodies of those fellows, but he didn't use any methods for now. He just reorganized his words. "Speaking of which, the people of the Blood Flame Order are quite interested in the Abyssal Region configuration. Tian Bang invited me to be his technical consultant, and Mrs. Halder is the same." He intentionally skipped over the hard-to-explain node of the White Bone Mound. He reorganized a plausible logic, but Yuan should be able to understand 70 to 80% of it. But Luo Nan himself was startled just as he finished speaking. Speaking of which, Tian Bang was the one who led the fortress project and exerted his strength in the solidification of the Abyssal Region's configuration. Could it be that he had thoughts about the Blood Soul Temple? This was a logical thing, and it was also an angle that he had neglected before. "Mr. Luo, since we're talking about Tian Bang, I feel that Mrs. Halder would be very happy to let Tian Bang know about your cooperation with them. Tian Bang might not care, but it's hard to predict the team behind him." Really? If I can weaken Tian Bang's possible allies and gain a helping hand for myself, the risk itself isn't that great. Why not? Hehe. This was another question that Luo Nan had never thought about. However, with Lady Halder's shrewdness, it was normal for her to have considered all of this. Compared to her, Luo Nan's mental level was truly not on the same level. At this moment, He Yuan's gaze landed on the virtual work area. She stared at the sketch and was somewhat astonished. This is a psychic drawing targeted at Madame Halder? Sort of. Luo Nan responded unhurriedly. He already discovered that no matter how much he considered the conflict between Madame Halder and Tian Bang, it would be a waste of effort. He would not let go of the chance to deeply research the Blood Soul Temple. The physical Blood Soul Temple beneath the volcanic region of the southwest was still bitterly waiting for a breakthrough in the aspect of configuration. This could be considered an extremely important link in his plan to purify the cloud world and assassinate Gong Qi. He certainly could not let it go. He Yuan adjusted her angle and gradually stood side by side with Luo Nan. She observed the sketch very seriously. I've seen Madame Halder once, and I always felt that her temperament was very hard to grasp. This drawing actually made my impression clear all of a sudden. Do you have any more concrete information? It's hard to say right now. Luo Nan did not speak of his immature opinion, but he gradually came to a conclusion in his mind. He was certainly not a match for Madame Halder in terms of scheming, but from the perspective of the abyssal region's solidified configuration, Madame Halder had the virtual brain system to support her. The gap between them would only be greater. Both sides cooperated with each other and mutually harmed each other. In the end, it all depended on the speed at which each side could materialize their advantages. Even if Madame Halder harbored ill intentions, as long as Luo Nan was able to crack the mystery of the Blood Soul Temple, he would still be the one taking advantage. At the very least, this was what Luo Nan understood. There was a problem. Should he accept Madame Halder's invitation and enter through the main door with the identity of a technical consultant? Or should he be a bit more straightforward? Regardless of whether there was a door or not, he should just smash a door open and actively invade? The psychic diagram had been drawn. What else was there to say? Luo Nan curled his lips. He felt more and more that these matters were meaningless. As his thoughts became clear, a stream of information was stimulated. It crossed space and connected with the Wraith sign who was standing guard in the cloud world. The spider silk that hung down by itself was proven to be useless against Madame Halder. Luo Nan could only let the Wraith sign personally take action in search of a miraculous effect. The ugly and strange demon traversed the deep mental space several seconds later. It also traversed the barrier between the cloud world and the local space and time. It descended noiselessly. It found its target amidst the turbid flow of emotions of the millions and millions of people in Xia City. Gradually approached. Eastern City District. The two first ablatums of the Blood Flame Order were in the room. The silence grew longer and longer. Madame Halder closed her eyes, blocking out all light. However, her mind was illuminated by a candle. It penetrated the gloomy darkness and her mind was clear and bright. Only in this way could she obtain peace. Of course, it was practically impossible for true peace to exist. This was because when one faced a master of perception, it was like encountering a soul that had always been attached to one's back. Perhaps there was no pressure from the silent thundercloud here, but a pair of eyes could lock onto one's target at any time. They would come and go willfully, and there was practically no possibility of concealment. This was absolutely the power of an extraordinary. Even though Luo Nan still had clear shortcomings right now, whether it was in terms of his body or his personality, his market prospects had already soared to the apex. They were boundlessly bright. In a society like this, even if the price-to-earnings ratio continued to rise, it was impossible to stop the expectations of investors towards the future. And potential competitors would not be lenient. The capital market was filthy, but it was not inferior in the inner world. A giant maelstrom of chaos had already formed. Would the investor who called himself a traveler continue to invest in the market, or would he raise his butcher's knife? As for the Blood Flame Order and even Madame Halder herself, they clearly knew that a giant maelstrom was in front of them. Did they still want to throw their limited capital into it? Well, she didn't have a choice. Madame Halder had signed a gambling agreement. She used her limited strength to pry open an enormous amount of capital. She would either achieve success and fame or she would leave with nothing, or she would even leap up to the rooftop. Yes. She was very excited. The element of crisis and despair seeped down from the higher levels of reason and emotion, layer by layer. They transformed into restless emotions and even trembled like electricity. From high to low, they converged into a flood, drowning her body and mind. Ever since she personally beheaded her husband, This was the feeling she treasured the most. Every time it came, she would carefully ponder over it and experience it for a long time. Boss. Yin Li's trembling voice rang in her ears. The trembling contained within was similar to her own, but not in spirit. It was a complete collapse of the higher and lower levels. It was a dismal and chaotic situation that could not be sorted out. It had to be said that after staying in the secular world for so long, Yin Li's way of thinking was no longer that of a qualified first ablatum. Instead, she was that of an outstanding merchant. She had already lost the ability to extrapolate and analyze from the extraordinary plane. She lacked the corresponding ability to resist pressure. From this perspective, she really couldn't compare to that traitor, Ren Hong. However, Madame Halder knew very well that she was the one who had created this situation. She had never raised Yin Lu as a successor. Not in the past and not now. Madame Halder still did not open her eyes. She only moved her hand that was on her knee a little outwards. 2 seconds later, her fingertips touched Yin Li's smooth and delicate hair. The warmth of her palm and the top of her head intertwined, and it felt very comfortable. She gently stroked it a few times, and then she heard Yin Li's muffled voice. Boss, I'm sorry. Yin Lu was the executive officer of her business empire, a tentacle of power in the church, and a pet to amuse when she was bored. Madame Halder never had high expectations for Yin Lu. As long as she could block out some of the noise from the secular world, it was enough. From the looks of it, this pet to amuse had already far exceeded the upper limits of her expectations. This proved that it was a worthwhile investment. Since it was worth it, why would she be angry? Madame Halder sighed softly. It wasn't because she was depressed, but rather, it was a rare emotion. Her action of caressing Yin Li's head was still gentle. Perhaps it was due to the relaxation after the high pressure, but today her emotions were like spider webs swaying in the wind and drizzle. She couldn't sort them out and couldn't see them clearly. As for the feeling, it wasn't bad. Not bad? A thought sprouted in her mind and her stroking palms suddenly froze. Her heart was on guard. These remnant thoughts and distracting thoughts that had long since settled in her heart had surfaced. What was the reasoning behind this? The air froze in an instant. Yin Lu, who was extremely sensitive to begin with, felt her breathing and heartbeat stagnate along with the pause of the palm on her head. She didn't dare to move. She could only raise her eyes to look at her boss's expression. Madame Halder opened her eyes at this moment. Their gazes lightly met. Yin Lu subconsciously wanted to dodge, but she didn't dare to. She could only freeze there, doing her best to maintain the little bit of calmness she had on the surface. Several seconds later, Madame Halder's sigh entered her ears once more. Xia City really isn't a place to stay for long. Boss, then this isn't a place you can leave whenever you want. Madame Halder spoke faintly. She closed her eyes once more and withdrew her hand. It's too late. Go rest. There's no point in thinking too much. It's better to have a good night's sleep. Good dreams. It's best if you don't dream. Yes, boss. Yin Lu didn't dare to say anything more. She slowly got up and left the room with light footsteps. She even turned off the lights. Even though she was paying close attention, Madame Halder's sharp ears could still hear the rhythmic sound of footsteps echoing within the apartment. The lingering sound was like an invisible demon. It drifted here and there, lingering without dissipating. Did such a demon really exist? Madame Halder was unable to obtain an answer. Chapter 684. This person's senses were really sharp. Ronan was astonished. Aside from those transcendents, Lady Halder was the only one who was clearly aware of the Wraith Talisman's methods. The Wraith Sigil was indeed there. It was crawling in the depths of Madame Halder's mind. Using inconceivable methods, it had intertwined a web of nothingness in the depths of Madame Halder's mind. The entire process went smoothly, and Lady Halder's vigilance didn't really affect her. It's good that everything went smoothly. That's all for tonight. Luo Nan twisted his neck and relaxed from the bottom of his heart. He couldn't be bothered with the clamoring from the rooftop. These people were merely experimental subjects for him to ponder over the Luo Nanchi. Now that he had a better target, why should he waste his time and energy? He sent a signal to the Wraith sign, telling it to return to the cloud world as soon as possible. Without the Wraith sign, it would be more troublesome to cross the space-time barrier. The Wraith sign's reaction had always been very timely. The heavily chained crow created by formatting theory was the most stable channel and control valve. However, this time the wraith sign's movements were somewhat sluggish, and its attention seemed to be diverted. Luonan was immediately aware of the minute changes. At this moment, the wraith talisman's focus was no longer on Lady Halder. Instead, it was on the other side of the room where Lu was in a daze. Luonan was quite baffled. The wraith sign had always been a picky eater. Even though he was good at using the turbid flow of emotions, he wouldn't easily become interested in the turbid flow. At this moment, the barrier in Li's mind had already collapsed. The reconstruction was still a long way off, so she shouldn't have the trait of attracting the wraith rune. But at this moment, the wraith talisman was circling around Lu in the depths of her mind. Its 6 extraordinary splendor eyes locked onto its target. A few breaths later, it opened its mouth and a blood-red radiance flowed down like scorching saliva. Luonan noticed that there was actually a speck mixed within the bloody light due to the particularity of the aura. The speck's luster was dim, and it undulated indeterminately within the bloody light. However, as it rushed out of the wraith sign's body and circulated in the deep space, some connections that had existed for a long time but had been cut off were re-established. The particles flickered and seemed to possess a certain level of activity. They flew out from the bloody light and flickered incessantly as they fluttered about. What's the situation? 80 kilometers away, Luonan was surprised by this turn of events. His mind cut into the body of the wraith sign based on the nature of the bloody light. He passed through the chaotic clouds of purple lightning formed from the chaos element to point directly at the Blood Soul Temple that was being suppressed. Following the guidance of the aura, he quickly found the source of the change in the second floor's garden area. One is missing. The overall layout of the second floor of the Blood Soul Temple was like an artificial garden, but its specific function was not too clear. However, there were a few foreign objects deposited here. They were the shepherd marks that the first Invisiblatums of the Blood Flame Order and Elder Mo Lun had refined in order to control the human-faced arachnid and establish the Blood Soul Temple. There were at most 4 shepherd marks and they looked like fireflies floating up and down. However, one of them belonged to the traitor of the Blood Flame Order, Ren Hong. Luonan forcefully pulled it out and tossed it into the bottommost layer of the magma lake, completely destroying it. This also caused Ren Hong to perish. The other one belonged to Mo Lun. It had already become the core of his puppet construction. It wasn't here either. Thus, there were only 2 shepherd's marks left in the garden. One belonged to Lady Halder and the other belonged to Lu. The 2 marks lost all of their light due to their connection to the outside world being severed. All that was left behind was their pure and precise structure. They had been obediently staying in this area all this time, allowing Luonan to study them. But now one of the 2 shepherd marks had been swept out. It was none other than the one that originally belonged to Lu. After it flew out, or rather, it was spat out by the wraith sign, it re-established a connection with its original owner. Lu, who was in a daze, was completely unaware that the aura of her body had once again connected with the mark in the depths of her mind. The mark was bestowed with radiance and vitality once more. She was like a firefly dancing in a river of blood. Wraith sign, what's the meaning of this? Are you taking the initiative to expose yourself? Luonan couldn't understand the logic behind this. Well, he had no way of communicating with the wraith sign through logic. He could only rely on the trust he had all this time and observe with a head full of fog. The situation of the firefly dancing didn't last for too long. Or it could be said that the firefly's autonomy only lasted for a few seconds. It would have been fine if the link hadn't been established. But once the link was established, a hidden switch within the mark was activated. Lu, the shepherd mark and the wraith sign were connected to the Blood Soul Temple. The problem of the difference in pressure had appeared. How could a mere Lu be mentioned in the same breath as the Blood Soul Temple and the wraith sign? The intensity of her aura could bestow light upon the shepherd mark, but the wraith sign and the Blood Soul Temple could light her up as well. Just like this, the power of the Blood Soul Temple within the wraith sign's body rushed over like water under high pressure. The strength of Li's aura was utterly defeated under the enormous disparity. The surging bloody light entered the shepherd mark and forced the energy of the energy to flow in the opposite direction. The shepherd mark appeared to be agile above the long river of bloody light in the depths of her mind, but it actually danced along with the general trend. It just flew in this way, following the bloody light and imprinting itself into the structure of Li's body and soul. The shepherd mark was condensed by Lu using a secret technique, so they came from the same source. Plus, Yin Li's mind was in a trance, so she didn't notice this at all. She just felt her exhaustion increase by a few levels. In a daze, she put on her clothes and fell asleep. In her sleep, the power of the same source but different quickly diluted the original nature of the energy within her body, causing it to undergo some sort of change and mutation. It entered an irreversible one-way path. Hiss, wouldn't Yin Lu become a vassal of the Wraith Sign's version of the Blood Soul Temple? Luo Nan's horizons were broadened as this play played out. However, he didn't consider how this change would affect him. Instead, a completely irrelevant thought occupied his mind. This configuration is a scam. Luo Nan had examined the structure of the shepherd imprint a few times. It was a configuration. Let's not talk about how marvelous it was. At the very least, its degree of precision was astonishing. It even surpassed the condensation ring by a level. Luo Nan naturally used it as a research target. But he never expected that this mysterious structure, which could control the larvae of the human-faced arachnid, would have such a deep hole buried in it. Which damned control hub would create a two-way channel? For example, Luo Nan used the heavily chained crow to control the Wraith Sign. It had always been a one-way channel. Luo Nan's soul strength transmission would be amplified, while the opponent's strength would be obstructed. This was the only way to guarantee the safety of the controller. Otherwise, wouldn't the controller be instantly countered if the controller grew stronger? It was just like Yin Lu right now. Such a design wasn't stupid, it was bad. Luo Nan thought back to the information he obtained from the Blood Flame Order. It seemed that this imprint wasn't developed by them. They borrowed it from some investor? The situation inside was complicated. Right now it was Yin Lu. If it was Mrs. Halder instead, what would the result be? What would the result be if the entire transformation happened? The transformation of Yin Li's energy still needed some time. Luo Nan could do it, but he wasn't prepared to speed up the process. He needed more time to observe. The problem was that while Luo Nan was stable, the Wraith Sign Blood Soul Temple was quite anxious. It wasn't enough to control Yin Lu. The surging river of bloody light followed the momentum of the charge. Borrowing the current state where the aura wasn't clear, it circled around Yin Li's body and soul structure for a moment before it found another passageway and charged over majestically. The Blood Soul Temple was on the other side of the channel. However, the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District was the foundation of the Blood Flame Order's existence. Luo Nan watched in a stupefied state as the Wraith Sign Blood Soul Temple's river of bloody light poured into the Abyss District with Yin Lu acting as a guide. This sort of reverse infusion was certainly abnormal, but Yin Li's chaotic state of mind, the homologous nature of the Blood Soul Temple served as a cover, and the Wraith Sign Blood Soul Temple's methods were added in. Everything seemed to go smoothly. At the very least, the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District was completely unaware of the external energy being poured into it. Luo Nan knew that the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District and the Wraith Sign Blood Soul Temple structure were basically the same. Using a visual perspective to observe, they were both lofty mountains. There were 5 groups of buildings built according to the terrain of the mountains. From bottom to top, there were stone forests, lava lakes, courtyards, gardens, faceless grottos, temples, halls, and altars at the top of the mountain, and so on. There was also fiery red lava flowing and zigzagging through them. Right now, the river of bloody light that originated from the Wraith Sign Blood Soul Temple had merged with the fiery red lava flowing up and down here in a short few breaths of time. Then it was transported to every corner of the Abyss District structure. And every time it reached a place, it would gather and organize the information there, giving it layer after layer of feedback. The Wraith Sign didn't deal with these things. The final recipient could only be Luo Nan. Yin Li's telepathic thoughts reside at the altar at the top of the mountain. There's a strong person. He should be fleshly by her side. His willpower is firm and he's on the 4th floor. This person is Meng Chong, right? Jiang Yuanzhen is on the 2nd floor. Wu Kuei's aura is quite obscure. He's on the 3rd floor. Soon, not only Yin Lu but every member of the Blood Flame Order who had the qualifications to occupy a certain position in the Blood Soul Temple's system had their status, role, and current state displayed. In these few dozen seconds, a confidential list spread out before Luo Nan's eyes. This list was undoubtedly the foundation of the Blood Flame Order. It encompassed all the talents and resources that the Blood Flame Order had accumulated over the decades. Once this list was grasped by someone. Fine, Luo Nan was holding this list right now. As long as he wanted to, he could follow the clues to the melon. He could rely on his soul cloak and various techniques and methods on the mental plane to wipe out these people in one fell swoop. It didn't seem to take much effort. Scam? What a scam. Luo Nan couldn't help scratching his head. How did things suddenly develop to this step? Speaking of which, if he hadn't interfered, if he had allowed the Blood Flame Order to complete a series of plans and fuse the Abyss District, the sacrificial artifact of the human-faced arachnid, and perhaps the physical structure of the Blood Soul Temple into one, then it would have been hard to say who would have control over the Blood Soul Temple. Sure enough, investors would eat people up without spitting out the bones. A somewhat childish thought flashed through Luo Nan's mind. Then he turned his attention to the most respected person on the list. Chapter 685. The results were somewhat outside of Luo Nan's expectations. The lowest level of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District was also a lake of magma in the stone forest. It was also a place where foreign energies were digested and smelted. The structure of this place was different from the other two Blood Soul temples. There were tens of thousands of believers here at all times. They poured out negative, intense, and extreme emotions and distracting thoughts through telepathic channels. Li's mutation power had bypassed this stage in the beginning. But after circling around the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District, she still had to pass through the lake of magma in the end. Thus, Luo Nan obtained the opportunity to make close contact. The moment he got close, it was as if he was forcefully stuffed into a roaring mechanical factory or a surging waterfall. Hysterical screams and roars filled his ears, causing him to almost cover his ears. Luo Nan frowned and grinned. He switched through a few layers of his senses in order to filter out most of the negative information. And it was at this time that he faintly sensed that Lady Halder's consciousness was also within this lake of magma. As for the exact location, the surging flow of negative and extreme emotions was far too noisy. The smelting mutation power itself was like a smelting furnace, and it affected his senses to a certain extent. Luo Nan was unable to figure it out for a time. But as the precision of his detection increased, Luo Nan was certain that Lady Halder, the leader of the Blood Flame Order, had her consciousness residing within the depths of the lake of magma in the stone forest. She was at the lowest level of this chaotic and violent place. In a certain sense, this could be considered as taking the lead. After all, this place could be considered the foundation of the Blood Soul Temple. It wasn't just the Abyss District configuration that was like this. Everything else, be it the construction and polishing of sacrificial artifacts, or the reconstruction of the physical structure, all had to be started from here. Wasn't Luo Nan stuck at this stage as well? From his perspective, there really was a problem with the configuration of the Blood Soul Temple. In the physical structure, the temperature of the lake of magma wasn't high enough. In the Abyss District configuration, the problem was that the efficiency of smelting foreign energy wasn't high. Perhaps it was because of this that Lady Halder personally oversaw this place. Perhaps she was mobilizing and arranging the power of the Blood Soul Temple to smelt and purify the extreme negative emotions that wildly surged in. This was more in line with Luo Nan's conjecture of a smelting furnace. Luo Nan waited for further feedback. But after a period of time, he discovered that the unstoppable river of bloody light under the control of the Wraith Sign was somewhat impassable in the foundational grounds of the Blood Flame Order. It was hard to advance into the detection area. It's really different with someone around. Luo Nan soon discovered where the problem lay. The reason for this was that Madame Hard's presence had greatly increased the melting ability of the lava lake in the stone forest. To be more precise, the melting ability of the area around her had greatly increased. The strange power of the Blood Soul Temple that had seeped in had no problem moving in the other layers of the magma lake. However, once it got close to the core area, it would be affected by the interference and even had the tendency of being smelted and mutated. If they got too close, they might be melted. If they resisted, they might be discovered. Thus, they could only draw a rough boundary and keep their distance. Luo Nan didn't interfere with the Wraith Sign's judgment. To hell with judgment. It was clearly evading by instinct. The good days of meat pies falling from the sky had passed. Now it was Luo Nan's turn to make a move. With these springboards that could reach into the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss region, it was very convenient for Luo Nan's mental senses to permeate inside. His pure observation mode was simply born for this sort of situation. This was, without a doubt, an opportunity to observe Madame Hard up close. It was completely different from the external observation of the mental sensing network. It couldn't even be considered clairvoyance. It was a direct touch and analysis. As long as he got a bit closer. But the more he observed, the more puzzled Luonan became. Where are the rules and order? Luonan believed that he would be able to see a strict logic and an exquisite structure within the core of Madame Hard's will. Only like this could she support a furnace, smelting the external pressure layer by layer, turning it into energy that she could absorb. Then she could distribute and utilize it. However, Luonan didn't see these things. At least he didn't see them at first glance. He only saw endless and boundless negative emotions. The area far away from Madame Hard was like this. The area near her was still like this. And Madame Hard herself was like this as well. The closer he got to where Madame Hard's will was, the more he could sense her state within the stone forest and the magma lake. She wasn't a comber, but a confronter. Her own mental and physiological plane was surging and surging, and it was clearly displayed. Desire for power? Desire for destruction? These inflated emotions and desires were like enormous roaring waves. They came and went, and they even charged back into the stone forest and magma lake. They stirred up a maelstrom of undercurrents that churned endlessly. Luonan also saw Luonan. His weight in Madame Hard's heart was quite heavy. He had the effect of the mountain of bones, the configuration of thoughts, and a series of other factors. He had fear, yearning, greed, and other emotions mixed together. There was also an indescribably enormous shadow within Madame Hard's heart. It seemed to be born from external stimuli. It was similar to Luonanchi but on a much larger scale. Fear, despair, and other intense negative emotions were born from this. This caused Madame Hard to intentionally or unintentionally carry out some processing, causing her emotions to become hidden and dark. It was hard for Luonan to see any results no matter how much he observed her. But in any case, the Madame Hard in the stone forest and magma lake was far too different from the powerful woman that Luonan had observed and understood earlier. In this place she was more like a crazy woman. She screamed at the extreme emotions of thousands upon thousands of believers, competing to see who was more greedy, more fearful, and more despairing. Could it be that her external appearance was just the embers of the lava lake after she vented her emotions? That didn't make sense. Wasn't her brain lacking oxygen from all this racket? How could she have the energy to scheme? Luonan was puzzled no matter how much he thought about it. He clearly felt that something was wrong. He tried to probe deeper with his mental senses through pure observation. This wasn't easy. Madame Hard's emotions were like a complex maze. They surged and churned, twisting and changing. Wanting to capture the so-called core was an extremely difficult matter. It was very easy to be led astray. Luonan tried again and again, but he was always a bit off. He was able to comprehend a certain principle from this. The mental world of a person wasn't much different from the vast and boundless physical world of space and time. This was especially true for a person like Madame Hard. She was violent and complex, and she was deep and boundless. It was practically impossible to reach the bottom in one go. But this didn't make sense. When the Wraith sign was in control, he clearly felt that the temperature of a certain area was much higher than the surrounding area. How could it be now? Oh, he understood. Luonan slapped the railing and came to a sudden realization. He couldn't blame anyone but himself. His pure observation mode did indeed allow him to probe deeper without any pressure, but how could he understand the heat of emotions like this? Using pure rational observation to probe into the level of emotions and desires was obviously incompatible. In other words, he needed to be scorched by the raging flames of Madame Hard's emotions and desires in order to grasp the crux of the matter. This was easy. He could start from nothing and slowly adjust. He could fumble for a level of intensity that could be sensed but wouldn't stimulate Madame Hard. The Wraith sign couldn't do this sort of delicate work, but he could do it for him. Luonan's expression suddenly changed just as he was testing things out. He subconsciously pressed his chest, but there was a rumbling roar in his ears. It was as if the roars of thousands upon thousands of people were forcefully shoved into his mind. He had a similar experience before, but this time it was different. This was because Luonan felt heat. This was a ball of irritable fire that was forcefully stuffed into his heart. It instantly swallowed up a small portion of his rational region. It made him restless and anxious, but there was also a willful and joyful feeling of recklessness that came from disregarding everything. Luonan's mind was a bit absent-minded in an instant. He wanted to sever the connection with Madame Hard's emotions and desires, but he hesitated to make a move. Someone called out softly by his ear at this time. Mr. Luo? Mr. Luo? Oh, Sister Yuan. Luo Nan suddenly woke up. He knew that he had been in a daze for far too long. He hurriedly suspended his probing and turned around. He made a slight movement and he discovered that a layer of cold sweat had appeared on his back. It stuck to his underwear and the cold wind from the balcony blew in. It was cold and drenched. Even low-level instincts of desire had this sort of impact. Mr. Luo, are you all right? I'm fine. Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed that his soul had flown to the heavens time and time again, and he had always been mysterious. The problem was that the matters he had paid attention to and pondered over were far too private. It was very hard to tell others and it would cause even more trouble if he did. Fortunately, He Yuan was the most considerate. She didn't make Luo Nan feel even more awkward. She just took out the results of her investigation of Li Yiwei's matter and asked Luo Nan to look over it. She gave a simple explanation. Through dissection and pathological analysis, the suspicious object within Li Yiwei's womb really doesn't belong to the category of a normal organism or tumor. The composition it contains should be quite complex. However, when it self-destructed, it first underwent a round of special poison contamination. Then it was placed under a high-temperature and high-pressure environment. Its original chemical structure was destroyed to the point of near extinction. It's very hard to find its nature and source. That's a chemical composition that only a mutant would produce. The so-called uterine leiomyoma is nothing more than a collector. Luo Nan directly revealed the answer. There was no need for him to hide this question any longer. He didn't say it before because his emotions were surging, and he wanted to send interference waves. He let it slip for a time. A collector? According to my observations, it should be something like this. Luo Nan was about to draw a simple diagram in the work area when he saw Mrs. Halder's sketch when he refreshed the page. He was stunned for a moment, and he resisted the urge to make changes with great difficulty. He flipped the page over. The shape of the parasitic mutant was roughly drawn in the newly created blank space. There was also a simple diagram of how it carried out its collection work within Li Yiwei's body. He had already simplified it as much as possible, but the diagram was still extremely complex. The chaotic lights from the balcony shone over. When the angle was changed slightly, it was simply like a demon painting was being created. Luo Nan was stunned when he shone under the lights. Chapter 686. Perhaps the virtual work area came with some animation effects. Under the illumination of the lights, the sketch of the parasitic mutant blended together with the fuzzy human frame. Its collecting tentacles replaced the positions of blood vessels and nerves, but they were unwilling to stay in their positions. They stretched out of the human frame and seemed to stretch out of the work area. They danced in the void. Luo Nan looked at his own work. He looked at those greedy and restless tentacles. He felt that there was something strange in his heart. It was like these tentacles were struggling and dancing. He was not unfamiliar with such a vague and bizarre feeling. It was just like when he used himself as an experiment earlier. Yes, he seemed to have taken drugs. Luo Nan had a bit of an idea as to why such a situation would occur. At this very moment, the irritable flames from the Blood Soul Temple of the Abyss District were still relentlessly invading him. The fuel of that flame was the extreme negative emotions of tens of thousands of people. He touched that environment and was affected by it. It was a bit like he was being assimilated. Fortunately, the situation was still under control. Luo Nan's thoughts were still very clear. His communication with He Yuan wasn't affected. He pointed at the sketch and introduced the situation he knew. According to my observations, every time a third-stage mutant is added, it means that it can collect a bit more samples. It's hard to grasp how much is needed in order to satisfy it. After all, there are requirements for type and quantity. And the chemical composition produced by each infected person will overlap. Overlap. He Yuan immediately grasped the key word. Luo Nan could only blink his eyes. If he told her about his arrangements 2,000 kilometers away, then he would be a bit too careless. Fortunately, He Yuan never forced him to do anything. She turned her gaze to the chaotic dance of demons on the rooftop outside. There are 22 over here. That's 22 seeds. Yeah. It should be very easy for them to blossom and bear fruit after being stimulated. Luo Nan responded without thinking. He discovered that He Yuan's words didn't sound like an analysis, but more like an emotional sigh. That was right. He Yuan had never faced the 22 small shrimps at the grand banquet. She faced the tens of thousands of potential infected people that were impossible to control with normal thinking. This number was far too excessive for anyone who maintained order. Luo Nan could feel the pressure He Yuan's heart at this moment. But then again, how did this become her responsibility? The military, the government. Oh, those people were still in the dark. Luo Nan suddenly understood. He Yuan had concealed the information of 10,000 potential infected people. In the end, she had shouldered a great deal of responsibility. But if that wasn't the case, how could the people from Quantum Corporation so easily jump out? Now that the situation was clear, why should he continue to bear the burden? Thinking to this point, Luo Nan blurted out, "Sister Yuan, we can talk about this matter now." He Yuan was startled, but with her intelligence she quickly understood what was going on. She laughed involuntarily. "I know, but we can still suppress it for now. Tens of thousands of people will crush some swingers." "I already said he's a swingman." Luo Nan mumbled to himself. But he was really just saying it. After all, he was a standard dreg on the political level. There's no need to think too much about it. Everyone specializes in different fields, so their methods are different as well. Just leave these matters to us. Mr. Luo, you just have to inform us of the changes in time. This matter belongs to you. I'm afraid that the following period of time will be very tiring. We have to be prepared. Don't worry, Sister Yuan. He Yuan smiled faintly. She let out a light breath as the cool air blew over. The night wind ruffled her hair and made her squint her eyes. She looked like she was enjoying it very much. This was probably the most standard example of taking a break from the busy. Luo Nan knew that He Yuan was certainly working around the clock during the middle of the night. There were endless matters waiting for her. Putting himself in He Yuan's shoes, he felt a chill run down his spine. If he were to stand in He Yuan's position, he would most likely go crazy. Perhaps it would be admiration, sympathy, or even pity. Luo Nan suddenly wanted to help He Yuan ease a bit. Let's not talk about the specifics of the solution. Right now it was good to be able to chat and relax. Yep, there was also him. He had been scorched by the intrusive raging flames. His mind was quite vexed. He didn't want to ponder over matters anymore. He just wanted to rest for a bit. Luo Nan waved his hand to extinguish the work area with this thought in mind. He leaned sideways against the balcony railing and adopted the posture of having a chat. But his emotions surged forth and he was a bit dumbfounded. What should he talk about? The wristband on his wrist vibrated at this time. First, the watch with the garbled code lit up. It projected light under the control of a predetermined program, forming a three-dimensional region of all sorts of intertwined garbled codes in the space of an inch around his wrist. Then the garbled codes began to form an orderly puzzle. A portion of it formed a simple human silhouette, and the surrounding area was this person's name. It was a character that he had no impression of at all. The garbled codes rearranged themselves during this baffling time to form a complete leaderboard. The first person at the top was the fellow who had just been revealed by the garbled codes. Next to his name was an item called Number of Missions Completed. The number marked on it was 5. According to Luo Nan's understanding of the grand banquet, he was able to guess the reason why this brother was on the leaderboard. He had already caught 5 prey and branded them with a tattoo. Should he praise his superb skills for this kind of achievement, or should he use the phrase quick shooter to summarize it? In any case, the appearance of the hunt leaderboard caused the atmosphere on the rooftop to become even more fervent. The scene became even more, restless. Luo Nan turned his head halfway and swept a few glances towards the rooftop. He couldn't help but curl his lips and say, "This group of people are really having fun. But they're good. They don't have to worry about anything and they still need us to wipe their ass when they cause trouble." There are still 4 people on the rooftop. They're definitely not having fun anymore. He Yuan was referring to the seated players. It was impossible to allow this group of people to continue messing around no matter how one looked at it. Luo Nan had already noticed a few ability users approaching without batting an eyelid as they spoke. They clearly wanted to completely control the remaining few. As for what sort of treatment they would enjoy after this, only the heavens knew. Luo Nan was amused when he saw this, but he soon came to a realization. "Sister Yuan, you're trying to persuade me. I originally wanted to console you." Luo Nan didn't have time to say these words before he heard He Yuan say, Are there any other harvesters besides Li Yiwei? Well, I'm really not too sure about this. Luo Nan was able to find Li Yiwei and the medical worker 2,000 kilometers away. Luck more or less played a role in this. He still needed to further research and ponder the principles of the night-level basic internal colonization biochemical reactor furnaces production, operation and hiding of the parasites. The probability of it being a female might be a bit higher. After all, the size of the parasite isn't small. It's easier to be exposed if it's a male. Speaking of which, Li Yiwei's understanding of the parasite is quite subtle. Right now her consciousness has yet to recover. I've already asked Mr. Bai to come over and use the dream technique to try and dig out some information. Li Yiwei is certainly someone who knows, but she's someone who doesn't know everything. She certainly doesn't know that the parasite monster possesses a self-destruct mechanism. At the very least, she doesn't know what the self-destruct condition is. Luo Nan suddenly laughed in spite of himself as he spoke. Then he couldn't help burying his face into his elbow. Sister Yuan, I'm afraid there's nothing else for the two of us to talk about besides serious matters. Yuan looked over in astonishment, then she pursed her lips into a smile. She took a step forward and used her elbow to support herself on the railing. She stood shoulder to shoulder with Luo Nan. She squinted her eyes as she welcomed the cool breeze. So you want to talk, huh? What do you want to talk about? Are you trying to coax me? In the end, it was rare for Luo Nan to see Yuan in such a lively manner, so he decided to forgive her. Luo Nan hadn't truly thought of a good topic up until now. His meager life experience and taste were simply incapable of supporting a pure leisure style of chatting. In stark contrast to him, the group of people on the rooftop were playing to their heart's content. These people could play, knew how to play and dared to play. Even the old-fashioned kiss cam was full of tricks. When a strong light beam shone on a designated group of people, it was hard to say what sort of eye-piercing scene would appear. Luo Nan's eyelids twitched as he watched. He slipped out a sentence, Let's talk. Let's talk about these people. It's like I said just now. They're really having a good time. His gaze wandered across the rooftop. Actually, he didn't need his eyes. He could sense the wanton and unrestrained emotions and desires of this group of people purely through his senses. This even included the passive participants such as the models. Under the turbid flow of alcohol and drugs, all of their thoughts and burdens were drowned out. At the very least, he couldn't see any traces of them for the time being. Is this considered being carefree and without worries? Living a befuddled life is more appropriate. That's right. Luo Nan subconsciously sighed. Mr. Luo is envious. Huh. Yuan turned around to look at him. I feel that Mr. Luo doesn't care about the enjoyment and treatment of these people. You only care about their relaxed and free state. Why can they live a befuddled life, while we have to face the cold wind and discuss these urgent and boring matters of life and death? Could it be that this isn't envy? No, I'm not envious. Luo Nan stared blankly for a few seconds before denying Yuan's judgment. He unconsciously moved his fingers. It seemed that he wanted to draw a diagram in the void to guide his thoughts. But in the end nothing took shape. So he could only say whatever came to his mind. I can only say that I'm curious. You know that I took drugs to alter my nervous system. Right now I'm not sensitive to alcohol, drugs and so on. So I don't really understand this state. Can the pressure and burdens of a person's heart really be forgotten through this sort of method? Yeah. Actually, I know the theory behind it. But emotions and desires really aren't things that can be controlled by rational thought. They have to be burned for a bit. Crap. I'm talking too messily. I understand. Yuan also went to look at the scene of demons dancing chaotically on the rooftop. Her tone was completely different from Luo Nan's. Mr. Luo, it's true that your words are incoherent, but your emotions are very clear. Sometimes, a simple transmission of emotions is enough for a human interaction. Luo Nan blinked. What emotions? Yuan no longer spoke. She just maintained her smile. This time it was Luo Nan's turn to understand. He laughed bitterly. Or is it envy? No, that's not right. Then he used an even more frank and harsh attitude to define himself. It's not envy. It's envy. Chapter 687. It was unknown which idiot had done it. Kiss. Cam's tricks had actually been played with Luo Nan and Yuan. When the lights focused on one's body, one would suddenly become the center of the world. The physiological and psychological states of people would inevitably undergo a certain degree of change. This involved instincts that had been passed down for millions of years. The only difference between people was whether they were more or less used to it. What's more, there were countless people clamoring. They screamed towards the balcony, "Kiss, kiss, kiss, rip, rip." From the perspective of the group of people on the rooftop, He Yuan was undoubtedly a first-rate beauty. Luo Nan could be considered a fresh and tender youth. His beauty was naturally delicious. People were impatient to watch a restricted-level drama. It would be best if they could personally participate. However, the reactions of the two people on the balcony were rather cold. Luo Nan knew that he was a bit nervous and excited right now. His heartbeat had increased a bit, but this was far from enough to shake his mind. He had no intention to ponder over the complex physiological and psychological mechanisms within. He just followed his simple emotions. His fingers faced the strong light and streaked across the rooftop. 99% of the people here are older than me. Sister Yuan, you're actually quite young. You're at least 50% younger than the people here. Why can they be like this but we have to be like this? Why can they use this method to be happy but I can't experience it at all? Yes, I can't experience it. In comparison, Mrs. Halder seemed to be a bit more pleasing to the eye. At the very least, she did things with great difficulty. She bore pressure that was unimaginable to outsiders. Luo Nan could understand this method, but he couldn't understand the group of people below him. He tried to place himself in their shoes, but he couldn't find any pleasure. He just felt a bit of envy and jealousy towards that state. He Yuan's voice didn't change at all under the strong light. On one hand, it's because we can see a level that others are unable to imagine. We can also see the danger that is clearly far away, but it seems to be coming in the blink of an eye. Actually, Mr. Luo, you can relax and even indulge at any time. It's very rare to see an ascetic monk like you in the community of ability users. Vision and enjoyment are never contradictory. If you can solve problems by saving minutes and seconds, then a crisis wouldn't be called a crisis. Cough. A crisis or something. On the other hand, perhaps it's guilt. I feel that I have made mistakes, that I can do better, and that the gap between reality and theory is unforgivable. I want to fill in the gaps and flaws and then torture myself over and over again. Luo Nan felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange. Right now it seemed that He Yuan was no longer consoling him, but some other element was mixed in. He turned his head to look. Under the strong light, He Yuan's side profile was fair and pure to the point of being practically flawless. Her calm and reserved bearing was extremely in line with Luo Nan's aesthetics. This should have been a very pleasing scene, but in the end he couldn't ignore the tossing and turning clamoring of those people on the rooftop. Many people felt disappointed because of Luo Nan and He Yuan's serious lack of cooperation. For the sake of stirring up the atmosphere, their mouths became more and more unrestrained. Luo Nan could only sigh in regards to this. It's fine if I torture myself, but now this group of people has come. Sister Yuan, right now I feel that letting this group of people play merrily makes my heart feel really bad. So Luo Nan let the few sparks that were leaping in his heart collide with the ointment that continued to accumulate and mutate in the depths of his body and mind. In the blink of an eye, the ointment exploded into flames, burning both inside and out. I've really had enough. Luo Nan muttered to himself. He cast his gaze towards the rooftop once more. Before his eyes was the glaring light and the malevolent and warped faces. His ears were filled with clamorous noise, and his mental sensing network gathered muddy emotions and desires. The three most important sensing channels merged into one, creating a grotesque and dazzling space together. This preposterous space was trying to swallow him up, to make him dance according to the terrible rules within, to smear the terrible ointment onto his body. Dream on. So Luo Nan faced the light and faced the several hundred gazes that were focused on him. He raised his hand and crossed his arm, making a classic umbrella gesture. He didn't conceal his emotions in the slightest. It was the equivalent of a blazing torch that was thrown directly into the boiling pot of oil of desire on the rooftop. Boom. The obscenities and vulgarities piled up and expanded far too much in a short amount of time, to the point that the details were completely lost. All that was left were clamorous howls. If Luo Nan wanted to, of course he could distinguish every single detail. But what was the point? His telepathic thoughts radiated out, triggering interference waves in passing. A second later, the powerful lights operating smoothly under the lighting control system suddenly went out of control. They were like incorporeal sharp swords. They hacked and chopped randomly on the rooftop, sweeping through warped faces one after another. Occasionally they would pass through some dirty corners, drawing even more curses from people. "You're crazy lighting engineer. Bullshit. What the hell is this? Faster thief. Hurry up and extinguish the lights." "Hey, extinguish them." Luo Nan complied with their request, extinguishing the chaotic lights. Everything. Luo Nan snapped his fingers and the rooftop that was surrounded by lights suddenly sank into darkness. At this time, even the wristbands and other electronic products that everyone wore could forget about lighting up. Of course, it wasn't to the extent of being completely dark and lightless. The light pollution of the city could more or less help, but the intense change in light and dark environment had already exceeded the upper limits of many people's minds. Some women were screaming and there were vague curses mixed within. There was also the rather awkward sound of someone falling into the water. The entire rooftop was a chaotic mess and the corresponding emotions were converging towards the same direction. People would naturally form uneasy interpretations of things they couldn't understand. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to use their brains in a rush, but the darkness would help them think, or let their imaginations run wild. "Mr. Luo." "Sister Wing." "Yeah, it's nothing." In the end, He Yuan didn't continue speaking. Luo Nan took it as her acknowledgement. So Luo Nan leaned on the railing with his elbow. He watched everything with interest and a clear conscience. He savored the novel feeling in his heart. Luo Nan had never experienced this sort of situation before. He didn't have a clear goal. He didn't have a definite direction. Perhaps this was just a prank? Speaking of which, what was a prank again? He habitually took this opportunity to reflect a bit. If he analyzed it according to Mrs. Halder's and Ian Lee's masks, then what kind of mask was he using right now? A mask of weakness? Yes. A mask of strength? Plausible but not. A mask of rationality? Come on, where was rationality right now? Luonan felt a bit dizzy. This vaguely overlapped with his memories of his early days of secretly drinking with Mo Peng. But when he carefully examined the roots, it was a very new thing. It was like an ignorant and restless existence was born from a corner of his heart. It sprouted and collided with the chaotic reactions of the surroundings, mutually intertwining and absorbing nutrients. Gradually, it became a few basic reactions taking shape and strengthening. Luo Nan wasn't clear on the specifics and he didn't want to think too much about it. He felt that this was quite good. It was quite relaxing. He didn't need to think too deeply. He just needed to follow the itch. Yes, it was like scratching an itch. He just needed to find a comfortable strength and use his strength. It was also at this moment that the Wraith Sign, who was leading the invasion of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District, seemed to sense the situation over here. It gave Luo Nan a sidelong glance. Luo Nan had never understood this demon. He didn't understand this fellow's reactions at all. He didn't understand where this fellow's actions came from. But right now, with this sudden sidelong glance, Luo Nan was shone upon by the demonic pupils of a different color. He suddenly understood. At least he understood a bit. This chaotic fellow seemed to be very excited. It was precisely this state that was transmitted over to Luo Nan. Luo Nan was able to grasp the information contained within. The Wraith Sign didn't possess intelligence, but it possessed a gluttonous instinct. It could be called aesthetic appreciation. From its perspective, the emotions and desires of living creatures were ingredients. Ingredients were divided into quality and coarse. Cooking techniques were also divided into high and low levels. In its eyes, its master Luo Nan was perhaps a savage who only knew how to hunt and gather. Even if he did occasionally plant crops, he did so freely. His harvests were all unprocessed. They were carelessly eaten and they tasted terrible. Though the quality of the ingredients didn't improve, a certain someone finally had some self-awareness. So hungry. Foodie. Luo Nan experienced the emotional state of the Wraith Sign. He felt that it was even more interesting in his mind. There was also inspiration. He clearly received inspiration. He patted the railing and decided to experiment with this new method. Luo Nan faced the darkness of the rooftop, as well as the restless emotions that frantically spread and grew within the darkness. Luo Nan let out a breath, but at the same time he made everyone on the rooftop temporarily stop breathing. Hush. Quiet down. Listen to me. Luo Nan didn't deliberately raise his voice. How could he make several hundred people listen to him? Well, it was actually quite simple. His soul strength interfered with the plane of reality and sealed everyone's nose and mouth. At the same time, his interference strength was enough to guarantee that everyone could hear his words. He was practically speaking into the ears of everyone on the rooftop. The rooftop instantly quieted down quite a bit. There were no other sounds, but there were even more intense sounds of struggle. The clanging sounds of tables and chairs being overturned lingered in the ears. And these noises quickly subsided. All that was left was Luo Nan's voice and will flowing within the darkness. Frankly speaking, you've provoked me. You've made me very unhappy. Of course, being happy isn't something I'm good at. I understand the opposite. Then, as a greeting and also as a form of revenge, I can convey to you the things I'm good at. From now on, I want you to shut your mouths and not breathe. I want you to howl in pain. I want you to beg for forgiveness from fear. Oh, if you think of this darkness in the future, I'll allow you to think of me. My name is Luo Nan. I'm a fellow who doesn't really know how to joke around. He Yuan looked over in a daze from the side. In the back, Qin Yikuan and Gao Da also looked through the glass door. They maintained their stupefied posture. Even further away, there were different people using different methods to watch this preposterous live broadcast. Luo Nan knew all of this clearly, but he didn't care at all. He only paid attention to the countless flames of emotions within the darkness. The turbid flow of the mental plane transformed into a long river of flames that flowed with oil. However, the long river of flames didn't flow outwards. Instead, it formed a whirlpool. Or perhaps it was just the swirling oil in the wok, roaring and roasting within the raging flames. The aroma of the food was nothing more than this. As for what was roasted, whether or not it would cause a fundamental change in the raw ingredients. Chapter 688. In the corridor of a certain floor of Aurora Cloud City, it was already around 3 in the morning. The banquet that should have been in full swing had been forcefully interrupted, and this place appeared empty and cold. Occasionally, a few waiters could be seen, but all of them were listless, as if they were still mourning over the tips that had flown away. Even a dazzling beauty like Zhang Yingying who passed by could not raise her interest. Zhang Yingying didn't have any opinion on passers-by. She just did her job of leading the way. Mr. Bai, this way please. Oh, don't be so polite. Seeing you like this makes my heart tremble. The middle-aged Mr. White's eyes narrowed as he smiled. He walked with his hands behind his back, looking as humorous as ever. He asked casually, "How's the situation over there?" As for Fei Jin, she's probably still unconscious. She's just a temporary vessel for her soul, so she should be easier to deal with than Li Yiwei. I'm talking about Luo Nan. How is he? I heard that his temperament changed drastically and he threw a tantrum. I've had enough fun, so I'm sleeping. Sigh, Mr. Bai, why don't you treat that kid while you're at it? His condition tonight is really abnormal. Mr. Bai's eyes twitched. What kind of stupid idea is this little girl coming up with? Although I'm old and unfilial, I'm still living a good life. I haven't lived long enough these days. Luo Nan and the others were in the room up ahead. Bamboo Pole was leaning against the wall outside, smoking. He saw Mr. Bai and Zhang Yingying and he waved his hand from afar as a greeting. Zhang Yingying ignored him and only looked at Mr. Bai. Do you want your life just to see a doctor? Where are the medical ethics? Mr. Bai said confidently, don't talk about morality. Let's look at the feasibility first. My dream invasion technique, to put it bluntly, is to steal some materials from the human mind and build a seemingly right but actually wrong little maze or something, confusing people and making them think that it is their own work. Then they will take the initiative to follow the maze and replace the beam with the pillar. The problem is, some people's materials are straw, which is light and easy to use. But others' materials are large rocks, which are hard to move and can cause a sprain on their back. If they are not careful, they might even lose their lives. Tell me, Luo Nan, Boss Luo and Professor Luo, are they using Thatcher boulders? What kind of nonsense is this? That's right, that's the principle. While they were arguing, Bamboo Pole had already put out his cigarette with a smile. He pushed open the door for them and gestured for them to enter. Zhang Yingying took the lead. She had already taken a few steps into the room when she realized that something was wrong. She turned around and saw Mr. Bai standing outside the door. He was looking left and right, his face full of expressions. Hey, what's wrong now? Mr. White coughed twice. Let's negotiate. We can examine the carrier, but can we move it out first? Inside the room, the two bodyguards, Qin Yikuan and Gao De, stood in a corner. He Yuan was operating the virtual work area, giving orders to everyone. Hearing the noise, they all raised their heads. At that moment, Mr. Bai's face turned serious. He poked his head into the room again and his wrinkles appeared on his old face. It's like this. Don't you feel bored? Really? Zhang Yingying blinked. He Yuan subconsciously shifted her gaze. Luo Nan's body was curled up on the sofa across from her. He was sleeping soundly, facing the backrest. He was completely unresponsive to the sounds of the outside world. At this time, Mr. Bai waved at her. Come out and talk. And you guys. He called out the few people in the room who were awake. At the same time, he called out to the Psychic Wave Network maintenance team of Shangding Building. Help me pull up the interference field diagram of the area. A few seconds later, the relevant results were sent back and shared with Mr. Bai in the mission channel. Right now the room has been turned into a pot of porridge by someone's soul strength. You guys don't even notice a thing? It was as if the dynamic image of the disordered magnetic field lines was fine, but He Yuan's eyes focused on several key data. Her brows unconsciously locked together. Bamboo Pole clapped his hands and said in hindsight, no wonder my smoking addiction flared up. So it was because I wasn't feeling well in the room. My subconscious wanted to come out and take a breather. Zhang Yingying curled her lips at him. Mr. Bai actually nodded in agreement. It's very possible. Vice President He and Yikuan, who have been with that person for a long time, have received an even more intense and direct impact. They are no longer sensitive to the subsequent effects. He Yuan's gaze pointed straight ahead. Mr. Luo, what's the situation right now? Do you have a clear judgment? He's dreaming. When it came to the field he was most proficient in, Mr. Bai replied straightforwardly. His cerebral cortex should be extremely active. The information stored in his brain region is continuously being excavated and reorganized. Moreover, it is constantly producing new things. Since his soul strength is too powerful, there is a corresponding power radiating out, but he unconsciously controls it. It's fine if he doesn't control it because the power will naturally scatter. It's precisely because he subconsciously controls it that it forms a meaningful building. Yes, it's popular to call it format right now. You guys have been inside for a long time and you're also in a clear-headed state, so you're completely unaware. However, if your mind isn't clear and you're in a daze, it's very likely that you'll be pulled into a dream. He has that ability. Zhang Yingying's teeth hurt from listening to this. What kind of situation is this? He Yuan immediately followed up with a question. Will this harm Mr. Luo? Mr. Bai spread his hands. I really don't know. If I had to say, what harm would there be from dreaming? For normal people this is true, but it might be a different matter for ability users. Basically, I believe that dreaming is a sort of adjustment of one's memories, information, and even emotions. Ability users usually organize the structure of their body and soul appropriately. That's why they rarely dream, or maybe they dream for a very short amount of time. There's a saying that the most powerful have no dreams. This is the reasoning behind it. Luo Nan is really strong. Zhang Yingying followed up with a sentence. Yeah, he's really strong. However, everyone knows that the structure of the body and soul is out of balance. Even with the adjustment of awakening, it's hard to say what the effect will be. Plus, his mood tonight is clearly different from usual. This could bring about variables. Mr. Bai explained as he tried to release his soul strength to probe the chaotic dream magnetic field within the room. He wanted to gather more concrete information. His tone gradually changed as he spoke in a dreamlike manner. He's currently in a period of adjustment, but he's adjusting a bit too frequently. He's endlessly digging and flipping through his memories. Oh, it's like there's a large amount of information continuously stimulating him. This stimulation is very direct, so there are very few logical things, but his nervous system is abnormally excited. Mr. Bai's voice was cut off. The color on his face wasn't too good. He looked a bit dizzy, like he wanted to vomit but couldn't. Can't go too deep. It's like a whirlpool. Plus, the touch has high temperature and pressure. Might even kill someone. It's weird. This doesn't seem like he's organizing material. It's more like he's stewing in a pot. What kind of toy can be stewed? Mr. Bai was on the mental side and Bamboo Pole was the only other person here. Zhang Yingying turned her head to look at him. Bamboo Pole spread his hands, expressing his helplessness. He was completely blind to the structure of the dream. After all, every profession had its own specialization. Not everyone could be like Luo Nan, who could adjust the frequency of his soul strength at any time and cut into different planes at any time. Bamboo Pole could only offer a suggestion. How about we be a bit more direct and rough? Just wake him up. I've read some information. Being disturbed during the REM period of a dream won't cause too many negative effects. Mr. Bai was a bit hesitant. All relevant theories will be discounted by ability users. Mr. Luo has a precedent of sleepwalking. He Yuan was referring to the incident with the 2000th miss. Luo Nan was highly nervous. He didn't sleep for dozens of hours in a row. In the end, he was both mentally and physically exhausted. He only fell asleep after injecting drugs. Then he assumed a strange posture in his half-asleep, half-awake state. It was very frightening. He Yuan wasn't there at the time, but Qin Yikuan and Gauda were there. They nodded their heads in confirmation. Mr. Bai furrowed his brows as he listened. He thought for a bit and walked into the room quietly. He approached Luo Nan and probed Luo Nan's breathing and other vital signs. The others followed him in when they saw him enter the room. How is it? His breathing isn't stable enough. His body's surface temperature is high. His muscle tone is abnormal. It really is a bit of RBD. Oh, it's the characteristics of REM sleep behavior disorder. But a more direct conclusion should be that his skeleton is under a certain amount of pressure. After all, the soul strength in the dream isn't easy to control. Mr. Luo himself doesn't seem to have completely resolved the problem of balance between his body and soul structure. We can't rule out the possibility of losing control and pressurization. Then we need to wake him up as soon as possible. The problem right now is that with his perceptual abilities and his current interference with the surrounding area, he actually hasn't sensed us at all when we surround him and talk. Mr. Bai shook his head with a bitter smile. He could only use the cautiousness of a doctor to make a suggestion. We need to wake him up. But we need to consider the possibility of losing control of his soul strength when the dream collapses. I can try to guide him, but from the current situation, his body's reaction is quite intense. His biological instincts are currently in an active state. The RBD of an ability user really isn't something to be trifled with. We also need to be careful not to let him injure himself. The group of people looked at each other in dismay. They didn't understand much of Mr. Bai's words, but they all understood the meaning of, "I'm not sure." At this time, everyone had already completely forgotten about Fei Jin, who was in the bedroom. Who would have thought that the main character wouldn't even get a turn during a routine inspection? Instead, an even more important character would have a problem. He Yuan pondered for a long time before finally speaking. Mr. Bai, the problem right now is largely due to the imbalance between the body and soul structure, right? Yes. To be precise, it's the control method that maintains the balance between the body and soul structure. There's a possibility of losing control in the dream. What we need to do right now is to eliminate this possibility. Okay. I'll make a call. Yuan spoke and then walked to the side. She was in the corner of the room talking to the person on the other end. After the call was connected, she gave a very direct introduction to Luo Nan's situation. Then she began to listen, only occasionally saying a few words. This continued for 5 or 6 minutes before she suddenly shifted her gaze. Mr. Bai. What? It's a problem related to guidance. Can you allow information from the outside world to be poured into Mr. Luo's dream more accurately? Well, what kind of information is it? Chapter 689. This was Mr. Bai's job. No matter how special the situation was or how difficult it was, he wouldn't shirk from it. He Yuan immediately shared the call with Mr. Bai, allowing the other side to communicate directly with Mr. Bai. This was to avoid any miscommunication. Mr. Bai listened very seriously. At the same time, he made a judgment to see if the plan on the other side would really work. As a doctor, he would speak without hesitation if he had any doubts. He would then consider the matter further. However, things went surprisingly smoothly. The man on the other side had a hoarse and deep voice that sounded intermittent, as if he was seriously ill. But the plan he spoke of was rooted in the foundation of an already confirmed domain. The logic was tight and the veins were connected. What was even rarer was that he had a very deep understanding of Luo Nan's body and soul. He spoke of some details, and Mr. Bai, who was present, immediately made comparisons. He had a sudden realization. After a few discussions, the wrinkles in the corners of Mr. Bai's eyes loosened. In the end, he simply took off his jacket as he spoke. He loosened his sleeves and began to adjust his breathing. He was going to act according to the plan designed by the other side. How should I address you? Xiu. Oh, I know. So it's Gym Master Xiu. Mr. Bai secretly praised. A great teacher produces a great student. It was no wonder that Luo Nan had said a few good words for him, the martial arts teacher, during his public lecture. Luo Nan was indeed worthy of it. The pleasantries stopped at a certain point. Everyone knew what was important and what was urgent. Mr. Bai immediately gestured to He Yuan to let go of the bracelet she wore for the time being. He Yuan didn't say much. She did as she was told. Mr. Bai took the bracelet and placed it next to Luo Nan's ear, fixing it in place. He used the shared communication device to communicate with the person in the distance. They adjusted the pace together. There was no need for him to say anything. The others in the room consciously backed away. They all held their breaths, afraid of disturbing Mr. Bai and Gym Master Xiu's joint treatment. Qin Yikuan was careful. She pulled God and the two of them guarded the door. Qin Yikuan deliberately went to the bedroom to watch the unconscious Fei Jin and put an end to any possible mishaps. Mr. Bai slowly exhaled. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. After adjusting his breathing, he softly said, "Hall Master Xiu, let's begin." The change did not happen immediately. It was only when Mr. White's voice faded away and the air became still again that a slight vibration appeared. It had a weak effect on the air. Everyone present was an ability user. Their senses were sharp, and they could all hear a wave of low and deep sound coming from the earring. From the sound of it, there seemed to be ups and downs, a rhythm and a turning point. It felt like there was a clear meaning to it. However, if one tried to identify it carefully, they would not be able to understand the details at all. It was like the chanting of Buddhist scriptures in the temple, which had been reconstructed and recombined in its unique rhythm. Zhang Yingying's eyelids twitched. For some reason she had some impression of this sound wave, but she couldn't find the source. No matter what, this was not a good time to ask questions. She could only endure and suppress the anxiety of not being able to help at all. She stared at how Mr. Bai was going to deal with this. Mr. Bai's eyes slightly widened. They seemed to be closed yet not closed. His body swayed. He was like an old man in the middle of the night who could fall asleep at any time. And this was the sign of the activation of the dream entrance technique, which he relied on to become famous. His entire body was in a nearly relaxed state, and his soul strength permeated into the surrounding dreamland magnetic field, using it as a medium for the sound wave to vibrate and transmit. What he needed to do next was to ensure that this sound wave maintained its original nature as much as possible during the process of transmission and reception. He wanted to preserve the original message. And because of this, Mr. Bai was able to understand the basic message transmitted by this sound wave from Xiu Xinyu earlier. It was a set of sentences. My heart is like a prison, my heart is like a furnace. My heart is like a mirror, my heart is like a country. It was as if Luo Nan was wandering through a long and chaotic gallery. Front, back, left, right, and even above his head and below his feet were piled up with paintings of thick ink and heavy colors. Even if they were paintings, Luo Nan wouldn't be able to find a clear concept to correspond with. The color structure of these paintings clearly destroyed ordinary aesthetic perception. Some were abstract, some were filled with metaphors, and some were the direct expression of emotions. Luo Nan could only understand them this way. In fact, he didn't understand anything at all. He only saw the chaotic structure and colors piled up layer by layer, filling his field of vision. He couldn't sort out a basic logic, but he was also unable to reject the corresponding perception. He could only allow the lowest level of intuition to passively accept all of this. He didn't care whether or not it would cause a misunderstanding. He just wanted to swallow it whole. The problem was that this gallery was really too big, and it didn't give him any sense of direction. There was only an endless pile of paintings. In the end, it was as if someone was forcefully pulling open his eyelids and pouring those dazzling colors into his eyes. At the same time, there was a physical stimulation that seemed to melt into his blood vessels at any time. Every color brought warmth, smell, and taste. And every stimulation required him to make an instinctive and emotional response. These stimuli didn't have any logical connection to speak of. Perhaps the same color, the same structure, but when stuffed in at different times, it would give him a completely different feeling. Luo Nan instinctively felt danger, but before he could understand what danger was, the illogical information had already stuffed all of his reaction pathways. He was completely lost in this place. He was like a drunkard who had been completely drunk. He only wanted to close his eyes, cut off all information from entering his body, and fall into a deep sleep. At this time there was no use of willpower. There was only the instinct of his body. When he was tired he would sleep. When he was sleepy he would sleep. As for whether he would wake up or not after sleeping, how could he know such a complicated matter? He was numb. He was completely numb. Even if the heavens fell and the earth cracked. Wait a minute. It seemed that his surroundings really were shaking. Luonan was able to sense it. It wasn't because of how intense the shaking was. Instead it was because under the stimulation of the inexhaustible and disorderly structure of colors and body sensations, the shaking was so neat and orderly. And it was so familiar. It was like a hook that probed into the depths of his soul, pulling out an entire string of information and memories that had been buried deep under the disorderly and chaotic ruins. This wasn't a particularly high-end or complicated matter. On the contrary, it was more of a neural reflex process that Luonan was already familiar with. It wasn't an instinct, but it was close to instinct. Luonan just triggered a bit of a bud, and then a whole set of reactions began to operate spontaneously. The chaotic and numb reaction pathways suddenly opened up a vein that was born due to the law. Then it extended all the way down. Sound. There's vibration. Muscles. From this moment on, Luonan clearly captured his own inherent organs and even his fuzzy self-perception. It was like a network node that was constantly vibrating, spreading its special frequency layer by layer. From this, Luonan sensed a dense neural network. He sensed his blood vessels and tendons. He sensed his bones, flesh, skin, and hair. He sensed his 5 viscera and 6 bowels. In the end he sensed his entire body. It was like a gear set that had malfunctioned. It struggled amidst the chaos and disorder. There were obstructions. But with the introduction of special vibrations, a habitual rhythm that wasn't instinctive but was close to instinctive took the upper hand once more. Heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys. Ears, eyes, mouth, nose, and tongue. This was the art of 9 orifices and 6 roots that Luonan had been bitterly practicing for the past few months. Under Gym Master Xiu's supervision, Luonan had already treated this cultivation method as a natural part of his life. He didn't make any special plans, but walking, sitting, lying down, observing, smelling, and touching were all part of his cultivation. Up to this point, the art of body gear came from sensing his senses, the rotation of his internal organs, and the construction of his body and skeleton. It was meaningless to emphasize the exquisiteness of the art of 9 orifices and 6 roots under these circumstances. However, Luonan was able to further strengthen his memories from the gradual formation of this operating mechanism. At the same time he dug out the foundation of the laws and rules of his life. His consciousness, which was still operating with difficulty, formed a short but clear and correct logic. With the body gear there should be a corresponding God gear. The body gear and God gear interacted with each other through coupling, forming the rules and order of his body and soul structure. God gear. God gear. The order of soul strength on the mental plane. The clattering sound of chains rang out. There seemed to be someone whispering into Luonan's ear amidst the unique rhythm. It was a familiar rhythm. It was a familiar abbreviation. Even if there were some distortions, Luonan was still able to analyze the information within. My heart is like a prison. My heart is like a furnace. My heart is like a mirror. My heart is like a country. The 16-word chant that originated from his grandfather took root in Luonan's body, soul, and neural network. Then it touched upon the mental plane and soul strength. Luonan's body and soul structure were slowly and firmly changed through 5 years of pure and extreme experimentation with drugs on his own body. It wasn't Luonan's innate talent, but it clearly showed the most essential rules and order of his existence. He was born as a human. Order was the cornerstone of his existence. It was the most precious thing. When Luonan had this realization in his mind, the heavily chained crow emerged from nothingness. It came from the depths of his heart, causing his body's prison format to manifest clearly. It acted internally. The coupling interference of the body gear and God gear returned to stability. A domain of rules was drawn for Luonan. It acted externally. The Wraith sign. Luonan's willpower and emotions exploded at the same time. Your F** king rebelling. Right now, Luo Nan was like a fisherman steering a boat on the surface of a hurricane. The body and soul system constructed by the laws was like a small dinghy. It carried him up and down within the boundless and chaotic storm of emotions and desires. He could be annihilated at any time. But even so, he still projected the heavily chained crow. He used the other end to firmly lock that malevolent and incorporeal wraith. He had to get to the bottom of this no matter what. What is this fellow doing in the end? The wraith sign appeared within the boundless elements of chaos. Unexpectedly, the wraith only curled up under the binding of the heavily chained crow. It was dispirited and listless. It didn't show any signs of resistance or backlash. But even so, there was still violent and berserk energy radiating from its body. It forcibly passed through the heavily chained crow that was designed as a one-way channel. It transmitted a terrifying high temperature that could burn the soul. Chapter 690. Luo Nan had already firmly controlled the wraith sign. The heavily chained crow's control over this demon was no different from any of the previous times. The wraith sign was indeed obedient. There really wasn't any rebellious situation. The wraith sign was still the wraith sign, but the wave after wave of high temperature was real. Now Luo Nan knew that this was a crazy storm of emotions and desires. Its intensity directly crushed the stone forest and magma lake of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss region. It was larger, more restless, more extreme. So Luo Nan compared it to a hurricane wreaking havoc in the ocean. The obvious truth was that this power originated from the wraith sign. It originated from the chaotic and disorderly main body of the wraith sign. It was just that Luo Nan had never understood it. It wasn't something that could be understood. Using reason to touch emotions and desires was basically like a chicken talking to a duck. One would never be able to feel its power. It was just like how the cloud world and the local spacetime were separated by a thin and hazy membrane of spacetime. It was enough to make the billions of people on the planet turn a blind eye to it. The Abyss region and the plane of reality were muddled together in a certain sense, but they coexisted peacefully under the natural moat of the mental and the material. Now Luo Nan personally experienced the burning power of emotions and desires. He knew how to interpret it, and this membrane was pierced through. The power of another dimension was truly transmitted over. The transmission of this power was the unceasingly rising temperature of the heavily chained crow. It posed a more fundamental question to Luo Nan. The heavily chained crow clearly controlled the wraith sign. Why couldn't it control the power within the wraith sign's body? There seemed to be some sort of difference between the wraith sign and the power of the wraith sign. As for where the difference was, crackle. The high temperature and pressure transmission of the heavily chained crow formed an even more direct stimulation and threat to the structure of Luo Nan's body and soul. Luo Nan himself didn't know how to deal with it, but a certain element within his brain reacted a step ahead. The external neuron, this special creation, suddenly became lively. It continued to radiate bright and splendid electric flames. Right. Speaking of which, the external neuron was attached to the heavily chained crow. It was connected to Luo Nan's self-format. How could the wraith sign's powerful transmission of berserk energy not stimulate it? This was great. It really was a collision between the virtual brain system and the wraith sign system. But Luo Nan suddenly recalled something. His mind temporarily moved away from the wraith sign and entered the virtual brain interface. As expected, the changes in the outside world were timely reflected in this magical visual interface, and the extent of the changes was beyond imagination. At the center of the virtual brain interface, inside the outline of the virtual brain that looked like a cluster of galaxies, billions of stars were gathered. However, they were flashing at different frequencies. Their positions were even shifting, showing unprecedented turbulence, as if they were experiencing an unexpected interstellar storm. The mysterious structure of the character, I, that was hidden inside, on the other hand, still maintained the same sense of order and hierarchy. Even if some of the stars and sectors were displaced, the structure would still be slightly adjusted as a whole, and the stability of the structure would always be maintained. It was very marvelous. After looking for a long time, Luo Nan vaguely jumped out from the structure of the mysterious I character. He let the structure of this activity revert to the comical dancing posture of his grandfather and father's photo. That's right. It really was like a god formed from millions and millions of stars was dancing amidst the violent interstellar storm. It also displayed a wonderful balance and coordination within the motion. Luo Nan's mind inexplicably became much clearer when he saw this scene. He was able to observe many more details. He noticed that there were 8 groups of rune structures surrounding the core image of the dancing god. They were the shoulders, the palms, the chest, the back, the top of the head, the soles of the feet, and so on. They were originally rather indistinct, but under the blowing of the interstellar storm, it was as if a layer of sand and dirt had been shaken off during the dancing posture. The fineness of the structure actually increased clearly, and more information flowed and transmitted wherever the eye could see. It might be said that Luo Nan understood something in an instant. It was just a subtle feeling. But it was precisely by following this feeling that his observation perspective completed a complete transformation without him realizing it. Luo Nan's field of view was pulled closer in his absent-minded state, probably because he was overly focused on the surrounding rune structure. Luo Nan's direction also changed. He was originally looking from the outside to the inside, but now he was looking from the inside to the outside. That's right. The current Luo Nan suddenly merged with the dancing god within the virtual brain galaxy. He turned his body within the intense interstellar storm, changing his angle of view, and cast his gaze towards the 8 floating and circulating rune structures around him. He experienced the details that he had previously overlooked. This sort of fusion wasn't particularly unfamiliar. Luo Nan's large coordinate system was constructed in a similar manner. But the corresponding dynamic changes, as well as the penetrating intuition that was closely related to the fineness of the surrounding 8 runes, gave him a wonderful confidence that he could understand many things. It was under the catalysis of this confidence that Luo Nan's gaze cast even further away. It cast itself towards the wraith shadow that was suddenly restless under the constraints of the virtual brain system. The wraith sign was still reflected within the virtual brain's interface right now, but it was no longer in the grayish hue of before. It was as if the wraith sign had come to life within this interface. Its 8 claws moved and it wandered within the dark void. Bewildering and nearly muddy light flowed up and down its entire body, so much so that it concealed its signature 6 extraordinary pupils. Luo Nan stared at the wraith sign. He stared at the dazzling radiance, but what inexplicably projected into his mind was a shadow. That's right, a shadow. If one only lowered their head to look, they would only be able to see the grayish silhouette of this nothingness. No matter how much one studied it, it would be the same. But if one were to shift their thoughts and shift their gaze, one would be able to see the standing tree that the shadow was clinging to. If one walked further up, one would be able to trace the source of the radiant radiance, and one would be able to see an incomparably enormous fireball. Luo Nan's thoughts came to a standstill for a moment before he was able to continue his understanding. It was a sun that erupted with high-temperature jets at all times. It silently rolled within the abyss of the distant spacetime. It surged with scorching heat, but it was negligible in comparison to its own power. It passed through some sort of opaque frame substance to finally form the wraith sign. A certain shadow that reflected a portion of the wraith sign's structure and a deeper essence. The thing reflected by the wraith sign was very grand, but it was precisely because of this that it set off its lowly nature all the more. Forgive Luo Nan for describing it this way, for he simply did not know how this understanding came to be. It was as if there was a large amount of secret information that truly existed, yet it was hard to perceive. The information blended together with a special logic to form an answer in his mind. This was, without a doubt, a cognitive process that allowed him to directly pry into the secrets of heaven. Luo Nan was willing to maintain his muddled state, to sever this cognitive vein. Child of the Order of Justice once said, "Observation is order and order is truth." This referred to the cognitive process itself. It was a transformation of the external world by the self-format. Luo Nan had once taught a class and changed these words. He used them to describe the prison theory on the mental plane. The scale was a bit larger. Contact was invasion. This description was certainly very refreshing when used on the strong. But the problem was that all effects were two-way. If Luo Nan did not know all of this, he would have remained in a state of ignorance towards the essence of the wraith sign and the source of its energy. He would not have experienced the storm of emotions and desires. He would have been an insulator. All he needed to do was fiddle with the low-end little shadow that was the wraith sign every day. But now, due to various lucky coincidences and the upgrade of some cognitive abilities that he did not understand at all, he was actually able to see through the phenomenon to see the essence. He was able to open up an entire meridian. At the same time, he also understood how to connect with the power of emotions and desires. As a result, all the obstacles in this path were completely shattered. The terrifying storm that came from the distant abyss of space-time descended with a rumble. It was as if a red-hot iron needle had been inserted into Luo Nan's brain at this moment. The needle was none other than the external neuron that could bear a sudden increase in pressure. Fortunately, this marvelous creation roamed between the mental plane and the material plane. It possessed its own set of operating mechanisms. When the pressure it bore exceeded a certain threshold, its existence on the material plane would instantly approach zero, avoiding direct damage to Luo Nan's brain tissue. But the pressure Luo Nan endured did not decrease at all. The virtual brain interface faithfully projected the terrifying power from the distant abyss of space-time. The millions and millions of stars in the central region were instantly engulfed by the powerful stream of rays that was like a supernova explosion. There was a moment when Luo Nan practically believed that his fleshly body and soul were about to vaporize in an instant. A ruptured blankness appeared in his thoughts. It seemed that this blankness would extend forever. But Luo Nan inexplicably passed through this rupture zone a few seconds later. He woke up from his muddle-headed state, and he discovered to his surprise that his consciousness still had room to move about. He still had leeway to operate and control. Though the millions and millions of stars on the central planet endlessly swayed and flickered, shifting and deforming, the mystical I character that served as the main structure still maintained a relatively stable dynamic equilibrium. At the same time, the rattling and trembling sounds were like millions of wind chimes. They rapidly vibrated within the storm, yet they maintained a sweet-sounding timbre from beginning to end, revealing their extraordinarily stable structure. The vibrating sound actually came from the heavily chained crow. It pierced through the void where the energy storm wreaked havoc. It also pierced through the millions and millions of stars, becoming the skeleton, meridians, blood vessels, and nerves of the dancing god. The chain shuttled back and forth, interweaving densely. Though it trembled within the high-temperature and high-pressure storm, it did not deform. It was both a binding cage and an indestructible fortress. In addition, it guarded the surprisingly stable valve at the end of the passageway. Yes, if the terrifying storm from the distant abyss of space-time was truly allowed to descend, then even if there were 100, 1,000, or even 10,000 Luo Nans, they would all be turned to dust in an instant. But without a doubt, the heavily chained crow belonged to the unidirectional channel design. It was constructed from the firm and pure laws, forming a true insulator. It was like a large sluice, firmly blocking the majority of the terrifying storm's impact. It also protected Luo Nan's core consciousness and fundamental format. Hold on. Since there was such a large sluice, why was there still such a powerful storm leaking out? Luo Nan could only search for the reason from his own body. He didn't have any flaws when it came to the construction of his rational format. But in another domain, on the level of emotions and desires that he had just experienced, he was completely defenseless. Yes, this was the primer. It was also the gap in the crack. What the heck was this? Luo Nan didn't know whether or not he should seriously criticize himself. But right now there was a more acute and direct problem. This terrifying storm that came from the distant abyss of space-time was endlessly penetrating through the gap and crack in his passageway. It was expanding to an even wider area. If the storm directly reached the plane of reality, how many people in the world would be like him, protected by the insulating fortress valve? Luo Nan shuddered when he considered this situation. He struggled, wanting to do something, but soon he discovered a phenomenon. This terrifying storm didn't seem to directly reach the plane of reality. Instead, it spread out from an unexpected region.